Acknowledgement. St. John's Church stands on the ancestral homelands of the Wapakute Band of the Dakota Nation. We respect and are grateful for the generations of Native people who have cared for this land. Just a few announcements before we get started. Tonight's program is being recorded for our Courageous Conversations Library of Speakers, which you can find on the St. John's website. There are Welka books at the registration table in the back describing Welka's work here at St. John's and the context for our committees and special groups. Please take one if you're interested in joining in on some of the service projects, activities, and field trips hosted by the women of our church. We also have a free will offering basket at the door. Welka here maintains fiscal independence from St. John's Church, meaning we take no funding from the church for these programs or many other outreach programs that the women of St. John's carry out worldwide. We'll have a question and answer following the program. You're welcome to step up to the mic with your questions. Finally, I'd like to take this opportunity to recognize the members of the Justice and Education Committee of Welka, Joe Franklin, Don Tommerdahl, Michelle Kramer-Prevost, and Margie O'Loughlin. I'm now going to invite Don Tommerdahl to introduce our speakers.
Thanks, everybody, for braving our return to winter to be here this evening. We're so glad that you're here. Just as a reminder, I want to read the quote that inspired us for our theme this year. It's from Brian McLaren's book, Life After Doom, Wisdom and Courage for a World Falling Apart. He writes, "This is my dream, and perhaps it is your dream and our dream together, that in this time of turbulence, when worlds are falling apart, all of us with willing hearts can come together with one another, poor and rich, whatever our race or gender, wherever we live, whatever our religion or education. I dream that some of us, maybe even enough of us, will come together, not only in a circle of shared humanity, but in a sphere as big as the whole earth, to rediscover ourselves as Earth's multicolored, multicultured children, members of Team Earth." So now I will introduce our wonderful speakers for this evening. Anthony Batiza is a co-lead for the Honest Storytelling Project, celebrating St. Olaf at 150 years. He is Associate Professor of Religion and the Department Chair of Race, Ethnic, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. Professor Batiza is a specialist in Martin Luther, moral theology, and Christian ethics. We also welcome Catherine Tegmeyer-Pack. She is also a contributor to the Honest Storytelling Project. She is a professor of political science and Asian studies. She specializes in comparative politics, international relations, Asian studies, comparative immigration and citizenship regimes, and rural sustainability in Japan. And our third speaker is Lily Middlestad, a St. Olaf senior and a contributor to the Honest Storytelling Project. Please join me in welcoming our speakers for this evening.
Thank you for that warm welcome. And whoa, a little static electricity maybe. Okay. Thank you for the warm welcome and the invitation and the chance to be with you all here on this chilly March evening. I didn't go through my calendar, but I think I come here like once a year at least for different events. I was here to talk about Martin Luther and Christmas hymns at one time, and there was a Jewish Christian dialogue last year, and so I'm really covering the full gambit of possible topics. So I'm excited to see what next year has in store. But I'm honored especially here to be here tonight, sort of representing in one small way the Honest Storytelling Project. a project that I'm very proud of, I'm very humbled by, and honored by the chance to be a part of with a lot of great staff, faculty, colleagues, students, all kinds of folks on the Hill and off the Hill working on this project. For our time tonight, I'm going to take like 15, 20 minutes just to do sort of a quick overview of what the project is and to throw in a couple of theological reflections that are kind of in the back of my mind and might be in the front of the page when I write introductions and edit conclusions and that kind of stuff. So I'll take about 15, 20 minutes max, then I'll hand it off to my colleagues, Kathy and Lily, and they'll go through their pieces, and we'll get some more substance, some more meat and content from them. I also tend to wander, but since we're live streaming, I'm told I need to keep relatively close to the camera. So I'll hold myself here as best I can. So the Honest Storytelling Project was born out of a grant that we received a couple of years ago from the Network for Vocation and Undergraduate Education, or NetView. They have a series of grants called Reframing the Institutional Saga, where they invite institutions, colleges, primarily some universities, but to consider how do you understand kind of your history, your identity, your values, yourself as an institution, with some connection to the theme of vocation. Vocation can be kind of a heavy-laden word for some people. In our parlance, it usually signifies like vocational skills and like technological, hands-on builders and makers kind of stuff. For some, it symbolizes a call to Christian ministry or some kind of religious order. That's how it's used in some contexts. For them, it can mean all or none of those things and beyond. So we're sort of taking vocation to mean much more broadly. How do you see yourself called to a life on purpose for the common good? And so how are we doing that individually, and how are we doing that as an institution? The co-facilitators are myself and Deanna Thompson, who I think has been down here a couple of times as well. And Deanna is the director of our Lutheran Center for Faith, Values, and Community, as well as the Martin Marty Chair in Religion at the college. We also have Kelly Sherman Conroy on our team. Kelly has been at St. Olaf for about a year and a half now, teaching in the religion department primarily. Teaching courses in Indigenous spirituality, Native American theology, and other pieces incorporated and related to that. And so we have an excellent team just there, and the team gets even better when you get into the writers and the authors. Oh, I pushed the wrong arrow. There we go. So the project itself is basically a 16-month exploration of St. Olaf's history, identity, mission, and vocation. That, as you heard, it sort of aligns with the 150th anniversary of St. Olaf. It doesn't align perfectly because we're doing the work as we're celebrating the 150th, so the volume we produce will come out 12 to 18 months after the 150th, but applying for grants and timing and things gets a little off sometimes. So we've had several sort of big parts of the project so far. Last spring, 2024, folks applied. They suggested chapter titles, topics, things that we're interested in doing or contributing. We then formed a cohort, we formed a team. We had our first sort of big team meeting during a summer seminar for a few days last June. We then just met last weekend. Time is moving quickly. We just met last weekend. We made the drive down to Shalom Hills Farm, which is just a skosh west of Mankato. And it was clear weather, so it was a good weekend to do that. And we gathered, we talked, we debated, we discussed, we read everyone's chapters, we gave everybody tons of feedback, maybe too much feedback sometimes. We'll see what people say about that. And just sort of brainstormed and dreamed together. We're going to come together again this summer, which I didn't put in there, in June 2025, and then we'll finish up writing our chapters, editing our chapters into the fall, into next year. So a couple things I want to highlight about this project that I think are important, things that make it kind of unique and kind of different from other celebrations of anniversaries and other kind of writing projects and edited volumes. The first is in terms of the content of the project. We're doing our best to try and articulate some of St. Olaf's commitments to things like inclusion, to things like equity, even though saying those words might be a problem if somebody is searching online for this talk. We're trying to make things more inclusive and more expansive, and we're focusing, as I say here, on undertold stories about communities, communities that have always been present physically, sort of spiritually, in history, and in different moments, present in ways that haven't always been recognized for a whole host of reasons. And so we have a lot of chapters and a lot of folks thinking about the sort of Native American and indigenous histories of the land and place, both before St. Olaf was founded and after its founding up to the present, with a student who's currently at St. Olaf contributing a piece as well. We're thinking about BIPOC faculty, folks of color, students of color, staff of color, in different ways throughout all of the different chapters. You're going to hear about immigration, gender, and a lot on sex and sexual identity. We have a couple of great chapters thinking about queerness, LGBTQI identity, the move to reconciling in Christ congregation on campus, rebuilding the archives for queer and trans folks that haven't been collected. Often when people collect archives, they sort of go to the presidents and the people with fancy names and titles and say, give us your papers and give us your history. And a lot of folks, of course, don't get invited, don't get included, and so some folks are trying to rebuild that archive for LGBTQ, particularly trans and queer folks. So, different content. This is different in particular if you were to go back and look at the different histories that St. Olaf has told about itself. Every 25 years, when there's been a major celebration, there's been a new volume that came out, kind of St. Olaf's story. It's sort of a fascinating chance to kind of look back and see what got included and to try to reconstruct why this story, why framed that way. In my sort of limited reading so far, I've noticed certain trends from, Norwegians, we're going to be different, to Norwegians, we're just like everybody else, to, hey, we're not just Norwegians, right? Kind of a high-level story. And how that story kind of maps onto different movements in the country. Norwegians trying to defend themselves perhaps against accusations of being too different when they're accused of being not integrating or assimilating well into culture, into whatever the existing culture was being created at the time. So just a lot of interesting things at play there. It's also important because the project, I think, is different in terms of the process we're using. Sometimes when you're doing an edited volume like this, people are assigned or pick chapters, and then you go sit in your office or in a library, or if you're lucky, in a coffee shop with windows. And you write your chapter by yourself, sometimes slowly, sometimes feverishly, and then you give it to the editor and say, okay, I'm done. It's very similar sometimes to how students write papers, I think. Right? There's a reason why there's some symmetry. Not you. No, I'm just checking in. I'm not casting aspersions, and I was describing myself in that description. But this sort of, hurried, sometimes lonely work of writing, and we're not doing that. So we invited folks to apply. We didn't sort of handpick or cherry pick people around the college. We're providing moments of support to kind of check in, to reflect, to educate ourselves, to do readings, to learn. We're all bringing in different methodologies. We have folks in political science and folks in psychology who are great at running surveys and analyzing data. We have poets who are amazing wordsmiths and can do things with 5 words that it takes me 100 to get to. And then we have folks in the humanities and religion and English, somewhere between those two, kind of bouncing around doing our own thing. We also have a lot of experiential and embodied learning opportunities. So during our June seminar, for example, that workshop we had last summer, we took a couple of sacred site tours. We did one up in the cities, thinking about Indigenous history and Indigenous lives, led by Kelly and Jim Bear, one of her colleagues who does sacred site tours. And some of us from St. John's and Bethel did a similar sacred sites tour, like literally a week later. So I got that really locked down in those couple of weeks, the tour site. We also did a sacred sites tour of some of the founding congregations, Holden and others that contributed to St. Olaf's founding. And we're getting sort of a compare and contrast about how those different histories emerged, how they were told, and how they overlapped, even though you wouldn't know that based on how some of the stories are told. So, a lot of that. All right. So I'm just going to quickly just give you a quick highlight of some of the different sections and authors. So this is, I say here, a draft. We are like in the middle of the writing process, so this is not fixed, but I did want to give you just sort of a general layout of how the volume is coming together. We have it right now broken into 4 sections, subject to change. The first selection and collection of authors and chapters, tentatively called Re-examining the College's Beginnings, are looking at stories of indigeneity and what does it mean to call something sacred, to give something honor in indigenous traditions. What does courage look like? What does reparation look like? Thinking about the story of the Mooses, Olina and BJ, is it BJ? Moose? Yeah. The founder of St. Olaf, and issues that she had with his unjust taking of her wealth and familial conflict. You can read her book for more information. Stories of immigration from China, queer archives, and immigrant college and history, past and present. The next group of folks are looking at renegotiating relationships, thinking about things like life on campus in terms of housing, in terms of various programs on campus, like our TRIO program, which targets to help and provides aid for students at St. Olaf. Thinking about bodies, active bodies, athletics, sports, rec sports, and questions about precarity and economics and what it means to be someone at St. Olaf who might have less than others, and what it means to be someone pursuing education and higher education kind of on the edge of economic precarity. Next section is called Acting Up and Reaching Out. This is where we have some folks doing some work, particularly on gender, on Hmong students and Hmong alums, on LGBTQ and queer organizing, and on individuals in the college who led efforts to reach out and form community for folks beyond St. Olaf's boundaries. Finally, the last section is thinking about music and ongoing outreach and work to connect music at St. Olaf to Faribault and Somali populations and other communities around. We got folks writing on becoming an RIC congregation, writing on students understanding themselves at turning point moments in their lives, and a reflection on what the land means and how we are related to and situated on the land that St. Olaf occupies. So, give you very quick summaries there, a lot more to follow. But as you can see, we're not doing sort of a, in this year, this wagon arrived filled with this number of Scandinavians, and then they began forward. We have a couple of versions of that story. This is a much more eclectic and hopefully broader collection of stories. Okay, couple moments, couple seconds, and I'm just going to do a couple reflections on honesty and storytelling to kind of frame a little bit of our work. This is I assume, rather religious crowd, so I can sneak in a little St. Augustine, which I do whenever I'm allowed to, or when I'm not allowed to, just to make it happen. St. Augustine's one of my favorites in terms of the pantheon of saints I like to read and to assign. In case you don't know, he lived in North Africa in the 4th and 5th centuries, kind of the cusp of the Roman Empire and its power. And he was often deeply concerned with honesty and the stories that we tell. He writes arguably one of the first autobiographies, his book called The Confessions. It's part prayer, part sort of getting ahead of the story about his wayward youth, part reflecting on where God was or wasn't in his experience of life from infancy to the present in his life as a bishop. Augustine puzzled a lot about why we do the things we do, and particularly why we do bad things when there's so little reward. He was particularly enamored with, and some would say essentially wrote, the Christian teaching on sin and original sin and what that means. And he thought about, why is it that we take things that aren't ours, not because we need them, but because we seem to just enjoy the pleasure of theft or the pleasure of dishonesty? What is it about us that curves us and bends us in these ways? He was particularly concerned about the stories that his people told about themselves, and particularly the Roman Empire. In the year 410, some Germanic folks from the north decided to stop by Rome and burn it. It's sort of an irony of irony. These were actually Christians. A lot more history here. The more important factor here was that they were disgruntled soldiers. The Romans had been hiring more and more outside help for their military, and then had decided not to pay those folks what they had promised to pay them. And so they came to collect their unpaid wages. And so sometimes when folks are dismissed from their positions and not paid what they were promised, people organize and get angry. Sometimes they invade places. So who knows? It's crazy what history shows us sometimes. So anyway, I'm still in the 5th century. Nothing else to see here. So Rome gets sacked. People are sort of distraught by it. Like, oh, how could this happen to Rome? We were so strong, so powerful for so many centuries. And they go, well, maybe it's because of that Christianity stuff. I mean, we were strong and powerful when we had these Roman gods. They're all about war and doing what they want. And now we're all really excited about this Jewish carpenter who appeared to not win any wars or lead any battles of any kind. So clearly this is what has happened. And Augustine pushes back and says, well, you're right. It was a big change from the Roman pantheon to this Jesus stuff. But he says, you know, the truth of it is, from where I'm sitting, Rome was never as great as you thought it was. He says, what you called virtues were actually glittering vices. What you thought of as honor and piety was actually just the will to dominate. You excused your invasion of other lands because they just so happened to be in need of your presence and your military strength and your culture. And so Rome wasn't so great, and God was never pleased with you to begin with. So, I like Augustine, not sure why. But Augustine is committed to this idea that political communities love to tell lies to themselves, and they tell them so long that they believe them, generation after generation. They construct myths for how they were founded, involving she-wolves and not blood and war and sweat and tears. And whatever good they might do, they too easily corrupt by not paying attention to the evil that they do and the, at best, mixed motivations they have for the good they accomplish. So that applies to nations, that applies to people, maybe somewhere in between, it might apply to colleges and institutions of similar sizes. Oh, that was my Rome versus Jesus. I forgot I had that one. Augustine's also attentive to the fact that the Bible is full of stories that have a complicated and morally ambiguous character. Even the best of them, patriarchs like Abraham, if you look a little more closely at the actual stories, they don't always seem so great. Abraham lies a couple of times saying his wife isn't his wife, just because he's afraid for his life. He goes along with different schemes that endanger Hagar and his son Ishmael. And so there's a sense, I think, in Augustine that this is difficult, hard to reconcile with these people being blessed by God, but something powerful in including the stories of people who are sometimes amazing signs of faith and courage, and sometimes morally bankrupt and horrendous individuals. That somehow a book that has all of those stories in it is better than a book that would excise either one of those in favor of the other. Okay, so we're in this work thinking about the stories that we tell about ourselves and the stories that we tell to each other. And there are all kinds of ways that some of our stories, I would say, can go wrong. Sometimes we intend to tell the truth, but we just don't know the truth. We're kind of ignorant of all the details. We skip over things we had never heard before. Sometimes our ignorance is culpable. We could have known. We should have known. A quick Google these days might have answered a question or two. But we didn't, and we should have, and that's our responsibility to own up to. And there's also times when it's not simple ignorance or negligence, but rather malice and active deception. We don't want to know, we don't want others to know. We're either afraid of the shame or the loss of power or ... Insert something else here. So one of the philosophers that I draw on a lot is this woman, Hilda Lindemann, who has this amazing book that I often go back to called Holding and Letting Go. I couldn't remember if I mentioned this in a previous presentation, but it's been long enough, so I figure you can't remember either, so I'll just keep moving. But Hilda Lindemann reflects on the idea of what it means to be a person. And a lot of times, personhood in philosophical discussion centers on certain qualities you have. In Christian talk, it's sort of image of God or created by God kind of stuff. And she approaches it slightly differently. She approaches it as someone whose younger sister had severe developmental and mental disabilities, and who wasn't able to interact and be a part of the family and live the same kind of life that she and the rest of her family were. And so she wrestles with, this is my sister. I have no doubt that she's a person, but the philosophical, the historical, the scientific language around personhood didn't give her what she needed to talk about her sister. And so she latches onto this idea that personhood is not found in some essence that we have inside of us, but in the relationship we share with others. And so she talks about personhood and identity as being something that we can hold on to and let go of with each other. So her sister is who she is because that she holds on to things about her sister and lets go of things about her sister. And that her sister in her own way does the same thing for her, and this is what it means to be a person. And I like this for a number of reasons, but in our context for honest storytelling, it's forcing me to keep thinking about what are we holding on to and what are we letting go of as a community. As we tell the St. Olaf story, as we tell the different facets of the St. Olaf story, what are we holding on to, what are we letting go of, and who are we doing that in relationship with? All right. Last thing I want to say before I turn it over to my colleagues up here. I think and write a lot about the virtue tradition, think about habits of character, virtues for good or vices for ill. And thinking about sort of the virtues and vices and habits that we see ourselves individually and as a community. And so as I work on this project with these great colleagues, as I round my 10th year here at St. Olaf, I think about what are the virtues and or vices that we have that might be glorious or glittering, great or problematic. There are many ways that I think that St. Olaf's kindness is right and good. As I am distracted by my news feed and by what's going on in social media, and as I'm drawn into and forced to, and we all need to, pay attention to what's happening in Washington and across the globe, I have a sense that the world could use people who aren't cruel, that we all kind of laugh about Minnesota nice, but I miss that in ways that I didn't anticipate. Sometimes I found it frustrating, and now I'm like, oh, well, I want that. Like, I understand how to work with that, and I understand people aren't actively trying to sort of demean, belittle, or strip rights and life away from people. So kindness can be very good. Sometimes kindness, though, can also be a sign of cowardice, and then it might not be so virtuous. You're afraid of saying something because you're afraid of hurting someone or being hurt yourself. You don't trust your relationship enough to say the thing that you're thinking. You don't trust enough to ask somebody what they're thinking. All those kinds of problems emerge. And we also sometimes are called to be radically courageous, to sort of be bold, to post 95 Theses on a door, or to post something to our congresspeople, or to post our bodies up in a space, in an office, to occupy, to resist. And all of that is good, and we could use some more of that. Sometimes what looks like courage might actually be rashness, however. Maybe we're running in sort of half-cocked and unprepared. We haven't considered, we haven't thought, we haven't done what needed to be done. And we're reacting out of our own hurtness or our own anger at pain and injustice. So, in all of this work, I'm trying to hold on to these tensions, to recognize that we never fully know the answer to which way we're going with virtue or vice. But part of the challenge then is to sort of have the open and honest conversation, to see what others see, to keep talking, debating, and discussing. And that's what we're trying to do in this project. So, thank you.
So now it's my turn. it's really wonderful to look out and see some familiar faces and to be grateful for all of you who took some time this evening when I don't know you. And I'm delighted to share two different stories with you as part of work I'm doing for a chapter that has the working title A College for Immigrants, which comes from my job interview at St. Olaf College. So Lily Middlestat and Lily was in my seminar class on immigration and citizenship this past fall, one of 17 students. So we're gonna tag team a little bit tonight. But I wanted to start off by framing what I mean when I say that I'm gonna tell you two stories. Your concern, I understand it, with your gathering this year is to talk about how we might build communities of belonging. And that's been something I've cherished most at my time at St. Olaf, is the opportunity to join a community of belonging and then to try and create spaces of belonging within my classrooms. And I do that through the teaching, and then especially I like to do that by creating projects, research projects that the students can join me in. And so tonight I'm going to tell you a little bit about a community that we tried to build together in our classroom this last fall, and then the way that that community gave access to prior seminar students that I've known who've also inspired the work I'm trying to do in this class. So, but first the title, A College for Immigrants. So I interviewed at St. Olaf 20-some years ago, a while ago, right, Sylvain? Who was my hiring associate dean all those years ago. And Chris Tomford was the president of the college at the time. And I remember being surprised when I went in for my half hour with him because he had clearly read what I had written. My dissertation was about responses to immigrants in Japan. And he had read chapters of it. I was impressed and, flattered, as I was probably supposed to be, right? But he said to me that he was happy to see someone with a background in immigration studies applying for the job because St. Olaf, he hoped I knew, had been founded by immigrants. And he appreciated that history of the college founded by immigrants. And then he said with a chuckle, the Norwegian Americans have done pretty well for themselves, so we probably don't have to worry about them so much anymore. And maybe you can be part of our efforts to be a college for other immigrants also, as you bring this particular background and training to the college. And I thought, wow, that sounds pretty good. I would like to be part of that. So I was excited. Tomford didn't last so much longer after I was there. He left. And the sort of highest level emphasis on that perhaps wasn't voiced in quite the same way. And we very much are and have been a college for many, many immigrants. And one of the things I found as I've taught this class called Immigration and Citizenship is that I get to teach maybe more than my fair share of folks who are coming out of a fairly recent immigrant background. They come into the class, they might be looking for some stories about their family. They may be looking for a way to reflect on things that have shaped who they are. They might be looking for a chance to study something that feels immediately pertinent to them. And that's true, of course, for so many different students. But when I was on sabbatical last spring and saw the call for the project come out, and it said Honest Storytelling, first of all, a great name, right? Isn't that a wonderful book title? And with all of the, calm of halfway through a sabbatical, I thought, oh, sure, I could just add that in. That'll be great. I know what I want to write about. I've got this idea. It'll be little, it'll be fast. And then I made it a little bit more complicated by deciding to do it as an academic civic engagement project with my students. And I got the idea that what I wanted to do was to reach out to alumni in a much more organized way and to hear from them, not only people I know, but to gather some of the stories I've been honored and entrusted with over the years, some of which are encouraging and inspiring, and we could put them in our admissions materials. I came to St. Olaf, received great financial aid, got the training, made my friends, and went off into the world. I think about an amazing alum of mine named Jay Shong, who's been representing East St. Paul in the Minnesota State Legislature, and the stories he tells, where he credits St. Olaf with part of his role. Those things happen at the college. We are a college for immigrants. But I also think about and want to tell the stories of people who've honored me with the hard parts. I'm going to share a little bit of that with you tonight. And it's kind of a report on research in progress. The chapter will almost probably be a report on research in progress, which I'll continue to do in some other ways to offer back to my colleagues at the college so we can get better at what we're trying to do. But I'll share a little bit of it with you tonight. So that's where I'm starting, and my commitment to it is I've doubled down in that, given our current moment where we're talking about these or about, it feels a little subversive. It's more important than ever to tell the stories that I have to tell you. So before I say any more about what I've learned from the larger project, I wanted to give Lily a chance to speak for a bit about her experience in the class, the first part of that story, if you will, what it meant to join a seminar and be told, you've got this open-ended, crazy research project, here's what I think you might do, but tell me what you think you should do, right? Fair? So here she is.
Hello, everyone, and good evening. Again, my name is Lily, and I'm a senior at St. Olaf College. I'm studying political science and environmental studies. Oh, perfect.
Those are other students I've done projects with.
Yes. Okay, so to understand how this project was approached and later evolved in our class, it's important to first provide some context. A seminar can be a very intimidating experience, especially when it consists of only upperclassmen, only political science majors engaged in an hour and a half of roundtable discussion. So again, the focus on this course was immigration and citizenship, and a lot of students in this course held very personal connections, whether they were immigrants themselves or had family members who had recently went through that transition. So from the very beginning, we worked together to kind of build a sense of community around this class and foster respectful conversation. So on the first day of class, we came together to create a class charter. And that class charter set the expectations that we would hold ourselves to for the rest of the semester. So with such a diverse group in terms of experience, perspectives, and opinions, these goals made it easier to approach these complex topics. And they provided a baseline of respect that we could return to each day before class. So we have our lovely charter up here. One of my favorites is BS, don't join in the conversation when you're unprepared, AKA do your readings for this class. But we were really gifted in having an amazing class and multiple students, all the students who were very, very engaged. So it was a great learning opportunity. So when I was introduced to the Honest Storytelling Project, it seemed very daunting. The question of whether St. Olaf is a community that everyone can belong to is really hard to consider. And part of that difficulty in considering it is I had never thought about it before. And in some ways, that's my answer. St. Olaf has always felt like a place that I belonged. I fit in, I have familial connections to the college, and my acceptance into the St. Olaf community was immediate and expansive. I knew from my first tour at St. Olaf, I stepped on Melby Lawn, I had on a little Norwegian sweater, and I had an Oli roll. And I was like, this is my place. So that's one of the reasons I was drawn to the school in the first place. I felt this sense of welcome and the sense of belonging. But as I looked around my class, my very diverse class, I knew I couldn't speak for everyone in this, and I had a feeling that many students did not feel that same immediate sense of welcome that I was given. So realizing I didn't have the answer to whether St. Olaf truly created this community of belonging, my first instinct was to turn to my peers who were immigrants. I wanted to know, did they feel a sense of belonging here? Did they see themselves reflected in St. Olaf's culture, in the student population, in the institution's values? These were questions that I felt very compelled to ask. But I thought deeply about this and recognized that my peers are here to learn just as me. We're all in the same seminar class. It's not their responsibility to educate us on their personal experiences or provide us with answers. But at the same time, it didn't feel right to leave these questions unanswered. If we were truly committed to understanding this concept of belonging at St. Olaf, we had to take ownership of that learning process and get creative with it. We needed to push and dive deeper into the complexities of these immigrant narratives on campus. We were wondering who were telling these stories. Were they being heard in academic spaces or only shared in small circles, or were they really even being shared at all? What structures were in place to ensure that immigrant stories weren't just heard, but they were being valued and uplifted at St. Olaf? So these were really not easy questions, and none of them had straightforward, simple answers, but that is why we needed to explore them. So our research wasn't just about identifying whether St. Olaf is belonging or not. It's also about challenging ourselves to think critically about what belonging really means and who gets to define who belongs or not. So as a liberal arts student, interdisciplinary is a word you hear probably multiple times a day. It's a term that gets thrown around in the classrooms, in the syllabus, and it's emphasized as a defining feature of the liberal arts education. So it's one thing to recognize the value of drawing from different academic departments, but it's a very different thing to actively engage in that process. So I was in a research group with 2 other amazing students, and we didn't come together with a pre-selected topic. We didn't draw on survey results or think we're going to think about this in a quantitative way. We really started with an idea or a question that came up in our conversations with each other. And that was, are we the only college thinking about this in regards to uplifting immigrant stories? And how do other institutions go about this process, if they do, of uplifting these stories? We wanted to know, are there other programs or initiatives at other schools that St. Olaf could possibly draw from and learn from their own experience? So as we began to kind of unpack these conversations and questions, we began to focus on comparative research. So we decided, in order to understand where St. Olaf stands in regards to immigrant stories, we need to look at a broader perspective. By studying institutions that are similar to St. Olaf in size, mission statements, and academics, we could not only assess what was being done well, but also where there was room for growth. So connections between like an assigned class reading and lived experience are not always super direct. So what this honest storytelling project really gave is an opportunity to bring the theories on immigration narratives that we had spent time discussing in our seminar and these articles we had discussed, and we really brought them to life through our research. So we began to explore how St. Olaf can serve as a platform, value these experiences, and integrate them into broader campus conversations. Looking beyond that St. Olaf bubble was crucial. By broadening our scope, we were able to see how does St. Olaf compare. As we looked deeper, we discovered that St. Olaf is unique in its effort to uplift and amplify immigrant narratives, specifically through storytelling. So my biggest takeaway from this project is we are discussing immigration in a way that is often not explored in academic settings. Storytelling plays a crucial role in carrying on a legacy, and St. Olaf's own legacy is deeply rooted in its founding by immigrants. Throughout the research process, we gained a deeper understanding of St. Olaf College itself, what we stand for as an institution, and how we represent ourselves. We reflected on the diversity that St. Olaf has and how immigrant voices are represented both inside and outside the classroom. While our comparative research showed that St. Olaf is unique in our storytelling, it also highlighted that there is much more that needs to be done in valuing and amplifying these immigrant experiences across campus. So I'm now going to hand it back over to KTP.
Okay, my alter ego at work. I have this whole persona. So you see why I asked Lily to join me tonight. So what I wanted to just tell you a little bit more about, and these slides, as Dave kindly pointed out to me, are just text-laden, but that's because I want to share some quotes with you. If you felt like you wanted to read them carefully tonight, you're certainly welcome to move a little closer, or I'm happy to provide them later as a PDF, and you can look at them more at your reflection, and I'll just share a little bit tonight. Before I start to talk about what the survey portion of our shared project yielded, though, I want to really hit home again that this is very much work in progress. I set out, as I said a few minutes ago, to see how widespread some of the more painful stories are that I've heard. I really wanted to try and lift up and share some of the complicated stuff that doesn't make it into the admissions materials, that we don't brag about when somebody says, would my kid be happy at the place you work at, right? And I'm one person, so I have a pretty strong hunch of what some of those less comfortable things are, but as one person, one professor, I need to go out and see if my hunch actually is tied to patterns. And I'm in the middle of that process still, so please don't think I'm telling you the definitive, this is what we know. right? This is what I have learned so far. And the long and short of it is I've seen some support for the hunches that I brought into the project. I'm going to focus on four key questions that I asked in the survey that I've sent out. The first of them is this question around what does it mean to be someone of immigrant background? In that first June meeting we had last summer, I said I want to do research on the experience of students of immigrant background or students from immigrant families. And my colleagues were really helpful and said, well, what do you mean? Do you mean refugees? Do you mean people who are first gen? Do you mean people whose parents came? Does it mean everybody who came from anywhere? And I said, yes, 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 yes. Do you mean documented or undocumented? Yes, yes, yes. And what I mean by that is I wanted to ask people if they would own it, how they would own that label, or not, how they would react to it. And in fact, I had a number of my alumni contact me and say, I don't know if this fits. And I said, well, you know, I mean, for the ones who told me what their names were, I'm like, well, you've talked about your mom's from Taiwan. That seems like immigrant background. Nope, that's not me. And that happened, I had about 5, 6 conversations like that, which I think is something I'll write about because that in and of itself reveals how some people are thinking about what it means to be of immigrant background in our setting right now. But here's a summary of what I've learned so far. Oh, this is just the cover. Immigrant background. Rather than answering the questions my colleagues wanted me to answer with this open-ended phrase, I got things that said, being from an immigrant background means that I am from a family that is brave, that is resilient, that is strong, and that honored me with the opportunity to learn in a particular way. That's what that phrase means to me. I got an answer that said, it means you're different, racially, culturally, and linguistically. Notice, nothing about legal status here yet, nothing about the visas people did or didn't come in on. It means that you've got extra things you have to deal with in your life, right? And then this is a really long quote, and I'm going to not read many of these, but this one is so gorgeous. Please indulge me. Immigrant background to me means the experience of existing and traversing within 2 or more cultural worlds, having to simultaneously reconcile, translate, and situate oneself in this cultural background alongside the physical periphery. For someone with that background, there is always the risk when interacting with others, both immigrant and non-immigrant, of being one-dimensionalized down to their immigrant background, to be seen not as a full person because the immigrant background is at the forefront of other people's minds. So immigrant family to me is a bit of a fraught term because it makes it sound as if it's an entire family who have started living in another cultural space different from the one they previously were familiar with, all have a common sort of experience simply by virtue of being related to one another. To be fair, there's to some extent a common experience, but depending on a myriad of different factors, like the fluency of the parent, the extent to which the children can quickly adapt to the new environment, the immigrant background that a person has can be drastically different from the immigrant family. From the immigrant background that the youngest child of some family has. I, as the youngest child of an immigrant family, had a rather unpleasant experience being parentified as a child and having to translate between teachers and parents and siblings. So I don't hold much positive feelings toward the family aspect of the immigrant experience. Okay, breathe. Lots of breathing in this project. There's a lot of hard stuff in these slides, so be sure you really want them if you ask me for all of these quotes and texts. But it doesn't surprise me. It moves me profoundly, but it doesn't surprise me. Another question that I asked is, what did St. Olaf do well by you, if you think immigrant background fits your experience? And I got a number of answers there too, which I can classify into a couple rough categories so far. One of them is students reflected on how the college served well by providing opportunities for a degree or professional success. A next would be personal development, all that wonderful admissions brochure stuff, right? Critical thinking, vocation, travel, St. Olaf and our international programs, right? And resilience. This gets really interesting, resilience in the face of racism, as an example of what we did well. Ouch. So this is a direct quote. How to navigate a white supremacist workplace is what I learned at St. Olaf. St. Olaf taught me how to talk to white people and know what they think of immigrants. Ooh, told you, this is tough. And then this one is more complicated, and I won't read it all to you. But this is a bit more uplifting, if also full of an awful lot of pain, where the student says that they felt, and this is just an excerpt from an even longer quote, that they felt that they came to the college with a defeatist mentality, that everything would always be harder for them. And what they learned at St. Olaf was that that need not be so. They learned how to rely on themselves. They learned how to cooperate with their classmates, and they figured out that there were opportunities to get past whatever hurdles were in their way. Mind you, this is what the college is doing well, so it's going to get harder before it gets better here. Okay, so the next question is, what aren't we doing well? Oh, there's still more. I'm sorry. Served well, also connections with other students, staff, and faculty. Lots of shout outs to the McNair program. Some nice shout outs to faculty, shout outs to classmates. Okay, now, not served well. Racism is by far the dominant answer. Not every single person who answered has said racism or other sorts of discrimination, but over 90% have. This is a very painful, very recent one. I don't think St. Olaf is inclusive for other cultures. It's pretending, but it's not really, and goes on to describe different kinds of unpleasant experiences in the classroom where a professor wouldn't speak with or call on this student because they thought that they couldn't handle speaking in English. I know, it hurts to read this. During my time at St. Olaf, I found the campus environment to be predominantly white, and it wasn't safe or inclusive to me. There wasn't room for me in my experience. These are typical kinds of answers. Again, this is not something that I can offer you a definitive X% of students at over 10-year period. I'm not at that stage in the research, but this is not an unusual answer or experience. And this is notably, both of the examples I've got on this slide are about things that went badly in the classroom because of a professor. So this is really painful for me to read. St. Olaf was not made for me, is another answer. That's also a fairly common one. And then goes on here too. My mentors, even people they had a positive relationship with, did not understand the emotional or financial pressures that exist. The focus on vocation was too abstract. Doesn't work for me. I needed a job. I needed somebody to help me think about loans and how to pay them back. Okay, so the next question, I think I'm on 4 now, so this is the last one I'll speak to tonight, is what should we do to get better? What needs changed? Because I'm action-oriented. The research as it continues, I'm now headed into a phase where I'm going to be working with offices on campus to show them some of these preliminary findings and say, okay, what else do you need to know and how much and how do I need to present it to you so that you can act on it? Here are some preliminary ideas from the first survey. St. Olaf College should prioritize creating an inclusive environment that actively supports students from immigrant backgrounds by fostering a sense of belonging and addressing their unique needs, cultural competency training for faculty and staff, and more scholarships, mentorship, resources for first-gen and immigrant students, and then more diverse perspectives in the curriculum and addressing instances of exclusion or bias. And then also in another long quote that I've got just bits of, I think it would help to celebrate immigrants on campus, hosting workshops or bringing in speakers. There are lots of people we could celebrate and lift up. And I think that there should be more training on microaggressions, implicit bias. Faculty and staff should have a chance to check in and see how well prepared they are to teach the students who are at the college. So full of really rich, specific, and tangible advice that I am determined to bring to the attention of my colleagues. Okay. As I said, there were 17 students in the class, and as Lily hinted at, some of the research that got done is stuff that I had thought of before I started teaching this group of students, and some of it is stuff that they came up with on their own. Lily talked about the cross-institutional study that she did with her team, and she'll tell you a bit more about it in a minute, but I had a team that looked at how our admissions situation is changing as the composition of the population where we recruit from is changing. So the two charts that are on the left-hand side are showing the states where we recruit most heavily from, where we admit students most heavily from, and then how the percentage of that state's population that is foreign-born has continued to increase over the past 20 years. The pretty figure on the right comes from a project where students thought that the best way to understand belonging was to look at student life and student organizations, and they went through and categorized all of the student clubs at the college over a period of the last 5 years and tried to sort through where there was room to think about the needs and perspectives of students from immigrant backgrounds. Okay, you're up.
Yes, so this is one of my group's final graphics. So we started by examining other liberal arts institutions, and we focused on factors like religious affiliation, dedicated support to immigrant students, and course offerings. So if you didn't know, there are over 200 liberal arts institutions in the US. So we quickly realized that that is not a feasible research project for one semester. So as the research progressed, we realized we really needed to narrow this down. So with the help of KTB, we found St. Olaf's Institutional Comparison Group, which is a set of 20 colleges that St. Olaf named similar to them in enrollment, size, setting, and academics, so being just in undergraduate programs. So one indicator of support that we looked at was the President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration, which is a coalition of college and university leaders that are committed to increasing understanding of how immigration policies affect students and campuses, and that is something that St. Olaf is signed on to. And then we also looked at an amicus brief, which is a legal document that is signed in support of the DACA program, so hoping to support undocumented students. And St. Olaf is also a member of this. And beyond these commitments, because it's great to say these things, but what do they actually translate to is a whole nother question. So beyond that, we looked at whether these institutions are offering classes on immigration and talking about immigration in an academic lens. So you can see these are just a few of the colleges from the institutional comparison groups. All the colleges with the pink have at least 3 or more related courses on immigration. So I believe St. Olaf had 5, which is promising to hear. And we also looked at whether these colleges have dedicated spaces for diverse student populations. So at St. Olaf, that could look like the Taylor Center for Equity and Inclusion, like a dedicated space. So that is in the darker blue. So St. Olaf on this graphic is looking pretty good, but obviously, as KTP has touched on, there's still a lot to work on and a really far way to go in terms of feeling the effects of these programs.
And so we're just about ready to wrap up now. We really look forward to being in conversation with you and so welcome the chance to talk about what it takes to craft communities of belonging and think all together about that essential question. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have, is it working? Working? Okay. So we have some time for some questions, and I can bring the mic around if anyone has a question for any of the members of our team here. Any questions?
You guys, I taught at 8 a.m. today, and then again at 9:30, and the 9:30 group was rough and quiet pauses, like I'm all out of awkward silence for today.
In the back there, we got someone.
Wow.
Last time, thank you.
Hi, I'm Al Montero. I teach political science. Yes, ma'am. Is that okay? Can you hear me? All right. All right, so I'm Al Montero. I teach political science at the other college. One of the themes in the presentations, what I heard was the need for cultivating a culture of inclusivity.
Yep.
That's the I and DEI that we keep hearing about, right?
That's the one.
How would you, and there was a number of different ways in which I think about that, but one of them, one very important component is leadership. And thinking about higher education and our institutions, how do you define the kind of leadership, and I don't just mean administration. It could be faculty, it could be staff, it could be the alums, it could be the institution more broadly. How do you define the kind of leadership that you think would help to foster a deeper culture of inclusivity over time at our institutions?
I'll give a quick, short answer, and then I'm going to run away and write that down as part of what I'm going to ask people when I head into this next round of research. Susan, look out, I'm coming to you. But I was so grateful when I saw the call for this project come out a year ago, because I think this is a first step in leadership among faculty, staff, students, and yes, the administration and our board. You can't lead on issues you don't understand, and you can't understand issues if you don't talk about them. And I have learned so much already from my co-authors in this project, small things, big things, new frameworks. And I think that this kind of work of putting these stories out there, of putting this kind of data out there as a starting point that you can't look away from. And you can't just say, oh, that doesn't happen. That's not our problem. That was an unhappy student that you interacted with. Or the students you know in the political science department clearly have some problems. This isn't part of the college as a whole, right? Which, you know, nobody's ever said that to me in those terms, but also if people don't see in some broader way what patterns we have, whether it's with regard to the experience of our queer students or our female students or our immigrant, whoever it is, you've got to have that to start with. Let's see how many things I can.
There's a lot of obstacles.
I know.
That's a great question, and I appreciate it. Just two quick things I'll say, I guess. There is a thinker I like, a scholar, who tries to think about how do we understand things like oppression and solidarity and these kinds of big, abstract, high-level words. And when talking about oppression, he says sort of one way to think about it is to figure out what's the cost of asking questions. Right? Not only to focus on economic or access to levers of power, but sort of, you know, what does it cost you to ask a question? Why does it cost some people more? Is that cost in how people respond to you asking the question? Is that cost in knowing that people will listen to you ask the question but won't actually do anything? So you're sort of faced with this sense of welcome but not being effective or impactful in ways. And so I raise that just because to me that gets at a feature of inclusivity that I think that we continue to wrestle with at St. Olaf and as broader communities and here and far. That depending on what metric we're using, what standard we're using to look for inclusion, we can find different features of it. But we often aren't asking ourselves who's getting to ask questions and whose questions are getting answered and whose questions are efficacious and all that kind of stuff. And I think the second piece I want to say is that I love hosting dinner parties. I don't do it as much of it as I used to before, like the COVID years. I'm still like somehow in this weird, coming back from that phase kind of experience. But the idea of like making, appetizer trays and like using my smoker. I have a smoker next to the grill, next to the other grill. Might have a problem. So I love the idea of like, smoking meats or making pizzas and like having people over and doing that kind of stuff. But I also notice that I get kind of anxious when I'm having a party. It's maybe hard for me sometimes to engage in like talking to people or like accepting the place is messy because in my back of my mind, I have this image of how it's going to go or how the dishes are going to turn out. And oh my goodness, the brisket is taking too long, driving me crazy. Right? And so I recognize in myself this idea that I want to invite people over, but I also have trouble letting go of some things about how I want the experience to go, what I want it to look like. And so I think that might be part of what I sense sometimes in how people receive St. Olaf student, staff, and faculty stories about immigration, about Olaf culture, about their time, is that sometimes people want to hear those stories because they think it's going to go this way. Tell me your victory stories. Tell me about how you didn't bootstrap your way up to things, but how we helped you, along with others, your family. How did we help you sort of launch into the world and continue your upward trajectory? Because we want the food to taste good, we want things to be warm, want everybody to be happy. And that isn't actually how it worked for the actual immigrants that founded St. Olaf, and so it ought not surprise us that isn't the case today. And so until we can deal better with that discomfort at our own kind of fragility, our own brokenness, our own, I would say, sinful humanity, it's going to be real hard to be inclusive if we're excluding the reality of ourselves.
I guess what I would say to this question is, I don't think it should be underscored how much professors really matter to students. And something that can seem as simple as creating a class charter that you see every day, it really does have an impact on how students interact with one another and how open the conversation gets. And professors may not know it, except we really look up to our professors. And I think if they are kind of leading the way in that open conversation and really like facilitating a class community, that they might not see that, but that goes really far beyond the classroom. So as you can see with what KTP shared, there's also a lot of hurt that can be caused by this professor role because it is a role of power over students. But when you have a good professor and you're able to really sit down and discuss hard topics, that can be very, very meaningful. So I would just encourage professors in that position to really recognize the power that they have to make a really positive change inside the classroom and also across the whole campus.
What I was going to speak to, you sort of already have mentioned, which is I'm unfamiliar with the St. Olaf campus. And so therefore I'm not speaking to that specific location, but rather, what are your ideas as to how we can develop a sense of community, removing that hierarchical type of feeling that you were just talking about? And I just throw this out as a possible way. Is there some way that more professors could do what I'm hearing you offering, which is maybe at the end of the class have a disorganized volunteer, those who are available, let's gather and have whatever kind of celebration or lack of celebration we want at the end, and not make it a requirement, but as you go forward with the stories you're hearing and are sharing that with the faculty, and possibly that could allow for that humanness to come into the interaction between the students and the staff.
I have a great example about this actually. So at the end of our immigration and citizenship seminar, KTP invited us all to her house during our class time. And so all about 17 or 18 of us showed up at her house. We got to see her dogs, which was so, so exciting. And honestly, like when I think about that class, that really did make a difference. Like I'm still working with KTP. She's my internship advisor now. But also those classmates who I didn't know before the class, like we still see each other and we say hi, you know? So it really, really is important. And I would urge professors to really lean into that welcomeness.
Thank you, because I take Cannon Valley Elder Collegium classes, which, and I find that the people really are, what should we say, engaged with one another. And that's the part about telling stories. We need, and I know there are professors for whom there is a great discomfort, slightly less perhaps, but if it isn't to say, okay, all professors must do A or B, but it's just a matter of having them think about, for them, maybe it's meet for coffee, you know, one day, wherever. Anyway, I know the other two are going to speak to this, so I will stop.
I just have a follow-up, and Al's going to nod vigorously about this perhaps too, but faculty have to be comfortable enough in their own situation at the college in order to be able to offer something like, come to my house and eat the cake I made and let my dog slobber all over you, right? Because when you have faculty who are on year-to-year contracts, when you have faculty who don't know if they're coming back the next year, and unfortunately, we're kind of in a lull right now. We had more senior colleagues retire in the pandemic a little early, and we're racing to catch up and get back up to a healthy percentage of folks who are tenure track. It makes it a lot easier when you're expecting to be somewhere for a long time. When we talk about tenure, it's easy to talk about the highest, noblest principles of academic freedom, right, and free discourse and scholarly knowledge. But to me, tenure is also something that lets me do parties at the end of the semester at my house, right? Because I belong there. I belong to that college, and these kids are this is my life. This is what I do. And it's an incredible honor. But if I didn't know if I was coming back, if I was, you know, running off to the next school where I was going to teach a class, then I don't think I'd be doing this.
And I wasn't necessarily suggesting it would be an end of class thing.
No, but anywhere along the way. So Anthony mentioned we have a chapter in the volume that's about precarity in the profession. And when you have people who are very unstable financially or in terms of expecting where they're going to work, it's really hard to expect them to provide community to others. So many of those colleagues do anyway, but that's a really crazy kind of generosity in giving to a community when you don't even know if you get to stay and be part of it.
Go ahead.
I'll just tag in real quick and say, just add another feature or facet here as well. Sometimes the discussions of creating community, these moments of like vulnerability, intimacy, can sound like we're selling a product that can kind of approach like a summer camp experience kind of offer. I know you weren't suggesting that, but I think sometimes it either sounds like, or for some people is, that kind of experience. Like students need to feel loved and welcomed and accepted, and so like be pleasant and buy them coffee and like, you know, give them hugs, and I'm picturing like glossy warm images and soft music and like a video of like us with our students. Yeah, yes. Occasionally you'll see pictures of yourself on the webpage. I have when you're like sitting with students in the grass, you're like, oh, when do they take that picture? So it's like little intimate moments. You're like, I didn't know I was being photographed. But anyway, so sometimes it comes across that way. And sometimes there is this idea that the solution to our problems is just more of those moments of connection, of relationship at that kind of interpersonal level. Others would push back on that, not saying that that isn't important, but saying that a lot of things are being missed with that. There's a political theorist named Francesca Paletta who has a book called Inventing the Ties That Bind. And in that, she talks about this idea of solidarity without intimacy. that we can confuse those two things, and that you can have all kinds of solidarity that doesn't involve kind of deep personal relationships or dog slobber or freshly smoked brisket. But sort of coming together in a genuine and real relationship, but just a different kind of one, where you're organizing for some kind of, discussing the school board budget reductions because of what's happening with state funding levels or demographics. Or maybe you're organizing to respond to an executive order. Maybe you're organizing because there isn't enough space on campus for immigrant communities to gather. So there's these kinds of things that you're doing that are forming community or forming relationships, but don't fit into like the easy coffee, food, dogs, children, babies, hugs kind of model. And I often get from my staff colleagues and from students, faculty colleagues and from students, this sense of, I don't just want to hang out more, I want us to be engaged in something meaningful and substantive and deep and important together. And who cares if we're friends? I mean, it's great if we're friends, but like, I only have time for so many friends, and there's too many issues to focus on forming friendships first and addressing the issues second. Those have to be happening at the same time. So.
As an Ole grad from 100 years ago, I think this has been just extremely exciting. And to hear of all the changes, we know what the changes are going on around us, but to see what you are actually doing and bringing forth to the students, I think is absolutely wonderful. I do have to congratulate or emphasize what a beautiful job your student did tonight.
Thank you.
And you are our second student, and she also did a beautiful job. So it's very exciting to see what is coming through our college. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
I got one more question over here.
So my name is Marva de Cantos, and I'm in Northfield because I'm a faculty spouse of this guy here. So he is the guilty one in this marriage. So when I came to Northfield, I was like, so what will be my place in this community? What will be my job, and so forth? So as a writer, originally from Spain, a native speaker of Spanish, I was offered to teach here and there some Spanish classes. And I was fortunate to be teaching in both colleges. I made the mistake of teaching both the same year, and then they say rookie mistake because the schedule doesn't work together. So I was teaching or grading a full year. It was horrible. But I got to see both places, and I got that experience. And one of the things I've seen, I don't teach anymore. I now have a nonprofit, and I do some other things. But the work I did in the classroom, just last fall, I was called from San Olaf because they needed somebody to cover 8 weeks in the Spanish department, somebody that was out in maternity leave, and they needed somebody. So I was in the classroom of this teacher, this professor that was in there, so I was like, I'm not her, but I'm here with you. So it was a very awkward position, but it was great in many ways. I had a wonderful experience with the students, but I saw a pattern that I saw in that class, and I saw at Carleton as well, that I was called a year and a half ago as well because they had a need for another class to be open. And in both settings, both colleges, what I had is mainly white students and one black student or two per classroom. So it was mainly white kids, and then a few Hispanic students as well, but mainly white. And I remember in the San Olaf class last fall, I was teaching about where are we, because the college belongs to a community called Northfield, and is those bubbles, and we need to keep bursting those bubbles. And I was giving them slides of the demographics in Northfield and how this is also a very white community with an immigrant community within the white community, and how those things play out, and how the poverty levels for immigrants in this community are staggering compared to the main white community, although there's white, also low-income people in town. And I work a lot with the Viking Terrace community, and that's not just Hispanic people. There's a lot of fixed income, white, old people in that community. But I always wonder, being in those classrooms as the professor, well, instructor, as they call the people doing those all classes, how do you feel being a very minority, clearly minority, in this very white community, both at the college and both in the community as well? And I remember years ago, Mary Easter, a retired dance professor over at Carleton, she said that she was one of the few, or one of the first Black people, families here in town, and how everybody would look at her funny down the street. And then she went to a theater, and everybody was singing the Norwegian hymn, and she was like, where am I? What is this song? So Northfield is slowly changing, I think the colleges as well, and the push now as a country of this inclusivity, thinking of those hard conversations, how the past informed the present, and all these things. How can we keep pushing against that, and how we keep improving as communities when we are not given a diverse community, as is the case here in town?
Yeah, thank you for sharing sort of that vignette, that look into your experience. And yeah, I mean, I think your take on things is spot on. Depending on the class, the teacher, the setup, you get very different experiences and a bit different sense of what the Olaf demographics are like. When I've taught courses like Intro to Race and Ethnic Studies, or I did a course on race and the Bible and Christianity, I had a much larger percentage of students of color and immigrant students, and all kinds of different demographics represented. But even so, I still think it was probably majority or close to white, right, depending on how we draw those lines based on how folks are presenting. I'll just add my own sort of personal experience, I'll put it this way. I have two small, not so small now, kids. They're 11 and 14, and so they've been here since they were 1.5 and 4.5. Started out at Montessori, and now they're in middle school and all that good stuff. I don't think I quite had in my mind what the experience of being in Northfield would be like for them and I'm still sort of processing it as I go along. I grew up in Des Moines, Iowa. My family is Black and white. I lived in a Black neighborhood through elementary, and then a white neighborhood in middle school and high school, and have moved between communities as I need to. And I think, yes, recognizing that my experience has been different than theirs, and that the experience in Northfield, sometimes they actually notice things that I don't notice because I've become accustomed to it. My son is particularly attentive to when folks are staring at me in ways that I either have stopped noticing or have, block out for whatever reasons, or I'm just distracted because I'm running off to present at a church or something. Or people ask me about my hair. My kids notice it more than I do. I mean, I don't not notice it, but it's happened enough that it sort of has become background experience more than it has for them. And so I guess that's sort of my place where I'm still wrestling with the tensions of St. Olaf, of the community at large, just because I have to wrestle with it because I can't take it for granted, like you were saying with your, oh, what is this place like for somebody else? Yeah, you become accustomed and acculturated and habituated to things. You don't notice them as much anymore. And so I think the best that I can do sometimes is to create space for being called out when I'm not noticing something, and creating space for students and others around me, faculty and staff and colleagues and friends, to kind of raise how their experience is different than mine. How are they noticing things that I don't notice? In the same way that I might notice what it's like to be a person of color, to be Black at St. Olaf. Others tell me what it's like to not be Lutheran or not be Christian or not be ... So yeah, just trying to figure out how to hold space for that.
different mix. My husband's not white, my kids aren't white, they don't identify as white, and I also have lots of stories of my kids noticing things. I remember having a conversation when my daughter was applying for college, and she was looking at the University of Chicago, and I was like, well, you'll have to develop some street smarts. It's a different sort of lifestyle than being in Northfield. And coming up through the OWL program at UCC, she looked at me and she's like, Mom, it's a lot safer for a lot of people to be on the south side of Chicago than in Northfield. I thought, okay, thank you. You are a well-educated child. So I am grateful for that experience. At my best moments, it reminds me that I have a different burden not to tell any specific story, but to constantly beat the drum of you don't all come into the classroom from the same starting point. Stay open, pay attention to where you're starting and what you're hoping to get, and pay attention to what your classmates are starting from and what they're hoping to get. It's nobody's job to teach anybody else their personal experience. That's what the charter exercise is all about. What's a good classroom? I'm like, what would you like in your discussion? And they look at me like, oh God, not this. And then I say, okay, have you ever been in a bad discussion classroom? And we usually start with the what we're going to avoid, because they all have stories of bad discussion classrooms. And usually we're able to reframe that as this is what we're aiming for. But that's just a way to honor my own lived experience, my husband's, my kids, but also all of these amazing people I've gotten to walk alongside while they're at the college, right? And who've entrusted me with their tougher stories. They've taught me so much. And in some of the stuff I've been writing, I'm writing about that. For me, this is a project about living into the trust and the being honored with someone's tough stories, and making sure that I can do some of the work of communicating and that they don't have to, is part of what I'm trying to do.
So my first introduction to St. Olaf was pretty early on, because my aunt went to St. Olaf, and she probably graduated in the late 80s or early 90s. And she would say to me, Lily, just know if you go to St. Olaf, I went to St. Olaf and I was a minority. And she said she was a minority because she had dark hair, and all her friends were blonde, and their last name was Johnson. And my grandparents had a really fun game at graduation, and every time someone walked across the stage and their name was Johnson, everyone in the crowd would go, yeah. They did that about 150 times, they say. So that was kind of the framing that I came into St. Olaf with. And I would say part of that definitely holds true, and that is still a presence on campus. And obviously I can't speak to the experience of students of color, but I will say something that I really appreciate about the students at St. Olaf and that really inspires me is multicultural orgs on campus, like the Black Student Union and Asian Student Union, have a really strong presence on campus, and they put on amazing events. They're always tabling, and I think that even a small kind of thing like that does help just kind of break down those barriers of what it means to be an Oli. And I think that we have a very far way to go in terms of inclusion completely, but I think that the work that those students are doing now cannot be praised enough, because they are walking into a very difficult environment with a lot of courage and a lot of just poise, and they are very active on the on St. Olaf campus, and I think that that's really important, and I'm very thankful to them and everything that they bring to the school. So I'm very hopeful for the future of St. Olaf kind of moving forward.
Fortunately, we are out of time. Did you have a question, Marie? Oh, you're going to, okay. Are you done? Yeah, I'm done. Yeah.
Oh, I certainly will. Thank you for telling us so honestly about your honest storytelling project. We're very grateful to have had you here tonight, and the representation of the three of you working as a team was gracious and highly effective. Let's have a round of applause. We have two more courageous conversations in this series that will continue in April and May, and we hope to see you again. Our next courageous conversation will be Thursday, April 3rd, same time, same place. Our guest that evening will be Serena Partridge, who is a musician, song leader, songwriter, and educator out of the Twin Cities. She has a passion for connecting people with their own creativity and with community, and uses song to help people develop a sense of wonder for this wild world around us. So please come back, singers and non-singers, equally welcome. And we will celebrate Earth Day month as we sing our way into spring. Thank you so much, and travel safely tonight.
You were so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You just got yourself another whole paragraph of juicy examples and all those letters.
The recommendation letters.
I know. This is